Dr. Uttam Pati has been waiting for his turn. He's also going to present about Microvita. And Dr. Uttam Pati is a professor and a former dean at the School of Biotechnology at Nehru University. He has 25 years teaching experience in, I'm not sure what this is, maybe he'll explain, eukaryotic molecular biology and genetic engineering. So thank you for joining us, Uttam Pati. We really appreciate your coming. I know it's late in India, so we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, Dada. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Dada. I actually apologize for not bringing any PowerPoint because I'm still a COVID patient and I'm running third week of my misery. And however, successfully, I'm trying to do it without medication. And I'm 60% fit now, but if I sit more than 1 hour, I get a problem. So I'll try to just discuss some issues but without PowerPoint. Forgive me for this. I'll discuss mostly about the disease contribution and how to promote or propagate new hypotheses for future science via microbiome. If you note that Baba wrote first book in Ananda Sutram in the classical Sanskrit language, and that was almost in 50s, I guess. Exactly 30 years later, he brought a book in English called Microvita. This time it's Greek-Latin mix, and then that was written in English. So obviously, if you see the gap of 30 years, there was a purpose behind it. The first one is the bringing a hypothesis for the archives and the concept, everything. And I'm very sure that the microbiome in late 80s, it was deliberately meant for the scientific beginning. And the microvita, although it is now not understood scientifically by many, but the way things are moving, it is going to be future science. And it was clearly mentioned in the microbiome book, is that the new hypotheses, new theories must be elucidated based on this concept before it goes to the laboratory. And if it doesn't go to laboratory, then new science, future science will become very difficult to bring out into the planet Earth. So having these two beliefs in strongly, so I first note that concept of on the mark, as I understand, it's subjective living through objective adjustment. This line is so relevant if you try to combine this phrase with the microbiome. The microbiome is the only responsible for supporting and helping you in the subjective living. And obviously, when you are in a subjective state of living, you have to adjust objective to the environment or through the clash you face through. So now I move to microbiome. Microbiome, basically, as you read the book, it is a low energy cosmic particle. It has two states, one the subtle and the crude. And inferentially, the subtle, you could make it positive, and the crude, you could make it negative tentatively at this stage. And now it has infinite dimensions, anybody who has read the book. Only depending on the specialization of oneself, one is to explore the own area and then develop new theory, new hypothesis, then obviously the experimental research for biomedical application and other remedy for the disease processes. Now, what is, if you think of the concept of a disease is basically three categories. One is its cellular aberration. It is psychic breakdown via invasion. The invasion could be internal or could be external. Now, anything is suppose invaded, like we have a body, our body has 50 trillion cells. Now, if you assume that we have a unit mind and the 50 trillion cells have fragmented minds, this is the way it is all bonded together for continuing or following a cellular, biological, biochemical, and energetic process. For whatever reason, if the cellular aberration occurs, and that leads to psychic breakdown, and then the invasion, for example, Now, how to approach this problem experimentally? So, for example, if you bring Microvita theory, then it has the crude part is the subtle part. The crude part is responsible for the negative or the any kind of breakage point it could bring through the negative energy. However, on the contrary, if you bring the positive energy, it is trying to restore. So ultimately, the disease process would be restored to normalcy through balance. So this balancing act between the positive energy and the negative energy is actually what the microbiome does. But microbiome does not do by itself. There is a subjective living. The one lives through a subjective approach to understand this process, what the microbiome does in both crude state and the subtle state. So one could enlighten or strengthen the mind to understand this balance process. And once you understand this balance process, then obviously disease doesn't exist because the cellular aberration and the psychic breakdown will attain its normalcy. So this is the whole idea, I believe, about the microbiome. It is meant for the strengthening of the mind, whatever process Dada already described, original the process, but I will strictly focus to the how to design new experimental approach so that everybody can understand the conceptual note of microbiome, both in its crude and the subtle form, through its positive and negative counterparts. So it is the energy imbalance that actually causes the disease, and energy versus the encounter. What energy balance one have inside the 50 trillion cells, that is the conglomerated status quo of the unit mind, versus the invasion that occurs from outside, or the invasion could be both. It is intracellular, inside the cell, and also at the same time outside. When you talk about outside the cell, the invasion could occur through bacteria, through radiation, through virus, and the internal breaks down when it occurs. It creates the lifestyle diseases like cancer, autoimmune disorder, psychiatric disorder, and also the cardiovascular disease. All these processes you see, they are all actually internal and external. For example, virus, bacteria, they're always there. Historic, anthropologically, virus, for example, there are 10 to the power 37 virus on planet Earth. And virus, we have been encounter virus for last almost more than 50 million years. So the virus here, it is basically a cosmic particle. And according to Microvita theory, virus is also a microbiome, but it's a negative microbiome. It's crude microbiome. It's not a subtle microbiome. However, when the crude microbiome encounters a cell or a body, then the inside the balance is changed. For example, virus does not do only harm alone. The virus, for example, why it's called a microbiome? Because virus actually creates life. It destroys life. It is the messenger of life across cosmos. It is neither living nor dead, for example. So it travels across the cosmos. Whenever you find a suitable planet and a host, it propagates. So the purpose of virus is to transmit the DNA and create life across the galaxy, across the planet. So that's why it's called a microbiome, because it is starts a process of evolution, and later on, when it invades for example, the human beings, it also brings a pattern called involution. So virus is actually a creative particle. It's a negative virus. In the crude form, it creates life, destroys life. Now, for example, then why this disease process, how does it occur? Now, for example, this clash is actually a clash of the energy particles. The body maintains, for example, we could talk about pH balance, we talk about calcium balance, magnesium balance. Similarly, there is a microvita balance also. That means a specific body or a specific cell type has a specific ratio of the microvita plus minus, and it automatically balances itself. But in subject to the class, because the universe is dynamic, every particle is in the motion, and obviously if every particle is in the motion, there ought to be clash. Outside, inside, outside versus inside. So this clash pattern is actually the whole idea is to maintain the balance. And the job of the, for example, the unit mind in a body is to understand this clash pattern, balances itself, have a subjective living so that it can have it balanced all the time along in its own protocol wise. So this molecular clash, for example, could be of two types. It is the energy clash in the subtle form. It is the molecular clash in the crude form between, for example, it's versus invader's mind versus the unit mind, invader minds versus the cellular mind, 50 trillion cellular mind, invader's chemical pattern or chemical substance versus the cellular chemical substance. So these three different categories of situation where the class is dynamic, it's natural. As long as the universe is in motion, the class is also a regular pattern. We have to, so a subjective mind has to understand through a subjective approach, the living mind, unit mind has to understand this pattern about the clash, how the invasion occurs, what time the invasion body got it, and how much energy it is losing out to the invaders, and how preparation it will take, how many days to actually create the imbalanced state to a balanced state. Now, this, for example, the trained mind which is trained along with understanding this balance pattern can only create this balance or retain this balance. Now, the positive, for example, can exceed over the negative. The reverse has become automatically in the favor of the cells, for example. Now, one example I'll give you in case of, for example, COVID. Now, for example, when somebody is infected with COVID, in the beginning stage, give symptomatic medicine. Now, the symptomatic medicine, although creates some kind of calmness in the situation, it also creates a lot of negative debris. Now, the negative debris, if the unit might understand that what state it was before, after medication, how much relief he got, and how much negative debris has been left over. So it starts thinking, origin of the energy pattern, so that it can neutralize this pattern through the stable mind, so that the original negative debris will be dissolved or discarded, having a normal restoration of the normalcy is back. Now, I'll give some of the examples here. For example, first, I'll discuss, next I'll discuss three things. One thing, how this invasion occurs and how scientifically we can explain. Today we can explain, and later on through the future pattern of the interpretation, how our explanation will be. So in this context, I'll discuss invasion types, for example, bacteria, virus, and the cellular aberration or cellular mutation. And second, I'll discuss little about pattern, polarity, and propensities. And if I have time permits, I'll discuss about reversible paradox theory, where how the system could be changed or reversed. Now, example, I'll start with, for example, protozoa, for example. Protozoa, for example, is, they are actually early animal, we call them. They are single cell, they are independent, they can exist independently, and they are also parasitic. They are free living, they can create drug resistance, they invade blood plasma, they also invade central nervous system. Now the examples, for example, trypanosomiasis, malaria, schimatosomiasis, leishmaniasis, dysentery. Many of us might have suffered once in this thing or lifetime. Now the question comes here, if the invasion, they're outside all the time there, why certain people get this invasion and certain people don't get this thing at all? So this answer we don't have currently. Now, one person may suffer this malaria and other person may not suffer this malaria. Some leishmaniasis and dysentery, some other people won't do it. So this process, that why some people don't get it and why some people get it, and what is the conclusion, what kind of theory you can bring out of this? So although the cause of invasion is not known, because they are always outside these single cell organisms, and the people who don't get it, that we have to analyze in a new point of view. For example, I'll tell you, if the mind is the behavior and the mind, its propensities, and the nutrition the individual takes, and its association with the environment, and how its response to the environment, these factors actually are responsible for the discrimination between one who suffers and discrimination between one who does not suffer. So the propensity changes, it's linked to the mind. Behavior changes if the mind is stable. Mind is stable if the nutrition is perfect. And association or with the environment or the pattern of environment with the mind, they all count together to analyze this fact. However, if you take the reductionist approach, all the data, suppose you collect the patient data in types across globe, you find that the data does not fit into any theory. So obviously, now Microvita is responsible for this thing because it is exactly the energy balance. So how much negative Microvita and versus being neutralized rapidly or taken over by the positive aspect through a stable mind. And as I mentioned to you, the mind, stable mind is linked to the quality, the propensity, the behavior, the nutrition, association, and the environmental state it stays in. Now, all this pattern actually increases controls the immunity of the individual. All the quality or the propensity I just described, they actually link to immunology or immunogenetics or the immunohistochemistry or any kind of immunological pattern of the individual is born with. Now, this immunological pattern is complex because the immunological pattern or the immunity is actually linked to the mind also. The more mind is stable, the body is more immune to external response or external invasion. The more mind is weak in depressed state or in some kind of unbalanced state, actually the immunity is lower. In that case, when the immunity is lower, for example, and the propensity is also changes pattern to negative. And if the immunity is lower, the behavior pattern also changes to the crude form, the negative pattern. If the nutrition is poor, then the immunity also goes to the negative pattern. And if the association with wrong friends, wrong people, and wrong environment, then also the immunity pattern is lower. So now this invisible pattern that if we don't have any other substitute reductionism or to comprehend, the Microvita is the only explanation which can satisfy all the quality, because the Microvita is deeply linked to the propensity and quality and behavior of the individual. Now, the linked mind, for example, now this is the bacterial part. If I come to the virus now, the virus part is more complex because virus is actually, we know the virus for last almost 1 billion years. The total number of viruses stand to 37 in the planet. Now, the virus, for example, it is our own genome actually contains more than 45% of the viral genome. So many millions of years, our body has been infected with the virus over last hundreds of millions of years. So the ones who are infected with the virus, though they integrated to our genome. So our 45% genome are actually a virus. By staying in the body, they actually strengthen the body, for example, because this is the cosmic particle. It's a negative Microvita. Its only purpose is to sustain the civilization, create the civilization, and create evolution pattern. And then later on, when the evolution is complete, it creates involution or the spiritual uplifting of the mind. So that's the virus role. One example I'll give you, for example, when in a pregnant woman, for example, the body does not reject the fetus because a viral protein is actually supports this phenomenon. So many cases are there where the viral proteins or virus is actually support our system. But then if it supports the system inside, more than 50% are a viral genome, our genome, then where the question of clash comes. The clash comes because this class comes when, because every time there is a new virus. If you remember the 1918 Spanish flu, for example, one example I'll give you, 50 million people were dead at the time. As you realize, at that time, we are not prepared because that was in the First World War, I guess, is ending, or the whole globe was in chaos, and then the viral infection. And there was, by creating the smallpox virus vaccine, for example, it took 200 years. And now after the Spanish flu, for example, suddenly found the innovation spread. And in 25 years, from 1920 to 1945, after Alexander Fleming brought the antibiotic, the whole science had become institutionalized. The first time a synthetic drug like antibiotic saved the lives of the millions of soldiers in the war field or from wound or from the infection. So now as you see, the post-Spanish flu, the rapid innovation started getting up. So the virus invasion is basically two phases. One is the role of this negative microbiome is actually to create evolution. And when the evolution is complete, then they actually sustain or they propagate the involution in the mind of the man. So they create life, the virus creates life, the negative microbiome. It also does civilizational growth and it makes the immune system robust. Now, for example, another example I'll give you, smallpox vaccine, it almost took 200 years. But if you see COVID-19, the vaccine came in market in 1 year. So that is called the gap of basically, as you say, 100 years to 150 years. After many, many invasion or every time there is a virus comes in, the society becomes rebooted or reactivated or innovation potential goes out. So virus or microbiome not only creates life across cosmos, it actually sustains the life across cosmos. It actually allows the individual to have a intelligence level high or intuition level high to create new innovation or the civilization change and new innovative potential. Now, now after boosting the civilization or creating innovation in the mind, it actually again goes to hibernation for the next round. That means when the static phase attained in the society, because for a long time, then virus is the only factor. And in the crude state of its creation, and virus not only does this innovation and boosting, and it actually does every function of the biological event. That means cell division, cell replication, immunological profile of the cell, and this is in the crude state. And in the subtle state, it actually makes the mind more rational, more intuitional, and ultimately more spiritual. So the eruption of a positive mind by the positive microbiome, it actually balances or down rates the negative microbiome so that the sustainability of the species continues forever. Now, now the second part for a third part is I'm discussing more about lifestyle diseases. Lifestyle disease, as I mentioned to you, like is cancer or cardiovascular disease or psychiatric disorder, for example, it is caused by when cells goes an aberration period or oxygen imbalance. So it caused this kind of lifestyle disease. A lifestyle disease caused by stress, again the imbalance between the negative and positive. When one cell becomes weak, for example, for whatever reason in the body, say it is a psychiatric disorder or Parkinson disease, Alzheimer disease, or cardiovascular disease, or the heart failure, or the diabetics, or the autoimmune disease, any kind of disease that is we call as lifestyle disease, which is caused by stress. The origin is very simple. Among the cells, among these 50 trillion cells, somewhere a single cell is gone aberrant. It has gone berserk. It does not follow the command of the community around it. And that's basically at two stages. First stage, the unit mind has some disturbances has occurred. And in the crude state, the cellular mind does not follow the command under the unit mind. The 50 trillion cells have to report to the unit mind like a server all day to the event or every second to second event. But for whatever reason, if the unit mind is not in balance, for any small thing doesn't matter, and the cellular imbalance or the communication between the cellular mind and the unit mind breaks. In that case, the cell does not know, or the cellular components like genetic component or protein component or the genes, they don't know what to do because they are not directly under the cellular command anymore because the cellular cell has gone aberrant or mutated. It can start simple by cigarette smoking, for example. If somebody smokes cigarette or 5-6 cigarettes a day, and end of the 6th year, you find the genome are mutated and the cellular mind does not understand this genome anymore. It become aberrant, moving like directionless in the one place where the other cells around, approximate number could be around 50,000 to 100,000. They actually don't communicate with this cell. So they don't know what to do with this and they don't know how to handle it. Then when they discuss with themselves to the cellular mind communication, where the unit mind is far away, not reached at this stage, they try to kill this single cell just by phagocytosis or by killing it. And if the immune system of the mind, unit mind, is strong, and these neighboring cells who have already encircled this individual aberrant cell, which is caused because of a simple cigarette smoking, because of nicotine, they try to kill it. And if, however, if the immune system of the unit mind is not in a balanced state, it does not have the capacity to coalesce together to kill it. In that case, there is a cell-cell communication again starts. The aberrant cell has become like a terrorist. It cannot communicate with the outside cells. So it sends new chemical signals in the crude state to initiate or to convert the surrounding cells as of its own kind by spreading some kind of new proteins. In that case, the around cells, they become initiated or converted in the negative states of the energy balance. As the result, they form a group there and immediately they create a new sense of cells, which is a low pH and low oxygen. So this low oxygen level is mostly responsible in the cells for all kind of disease, say it Alzheimer, say it's cardiovascular disease, say it's cancer or formation of a tumor or anywhere, wherever there is a low oxygen level in the cell, that is created the origin of the lifestyle disease processes. And in this situation, if the individual understand or still what is happening through its own method of understanding the cellular processes through positive microbiome, it actually has sufficient time and the skill to repair the process. In that case, the single cell, when they get the new energy injection into the site, they immediately revert back to the normal state as the death of the trapped cell, or there is a tug of war going on between the single cell and the surrounding cells. So this process in science today, we call it cell-cell competition, which normally we don't see it, and we won't be able to see it as long as we are in the crude state of our existence, where we read in the books and understand a biochemical process and say that this is happening. This process is documented called cell-cell competition, where every cell discusses, debates, communicates, and then there is a segregation of the group, and then they try to stop the communication. Then they try to win over each other in an invasion process. And if that process fails, then the whole body follows that pattern. If the process wins, and then the whole body reverts back to the normal state. So this new concept of the reverting back to disease process to self-education, self-concentration using positive microbiome is a true biological futuristic event, which one has to only rationalize, hypothesize, and through intuitive practices, they can only see through the process. So they listen every command from the cells where the things might go wrong, where the things could go right, and what procedure one will take after this situation. Now, the cellular aberration, it not only basically caused by the depression, or the lack of nutrition, or bad environment. It also the basic process of the aging, wear and tear. And that this aging process also would be reverted back if the balance is restored in favor of the positive microbiome instead of the negative microbiome. Now, the two kind of class I mentioned, one is cell-cell competition, where the crude cell versus the subtle cell, where there is two kind of communication and clash. And if that war is on, then the intuitive mind has a sufficiently control over the cellular minds to transmit the message all over the body system. And on otherwise, if this procedure is not known to the individual, if the procedure is not even at all thought about the individual, forget being attempting how to reverse this process, and then it will be very difficult. That's the situation today, because the modern science or the medical treatment basically it deals only with the crude state of the interaction, invasion, and creation of cell debris with sufficient amount of negative energy to destroy the whole cellular balance. And now the only way one could control this procedure in three stages. One is basically, I call it oxygen balance. We have shown that at least in lab experiment, at least over the last 15 years, that we have cured colon tumor, we have treated colon tumor, breast tumor, purely through single molecule of oxygen. That means we have realized that in case of the negative state of the cell, for example, when the cell is deprived of the oxygen, there is a formation of a hypoxia core and low pH core, wherever the organ is, heart tissue, soft tissue, breast tissue tumor, colon tumor, where there is oxygen level is low and the cell is suffocating and the pH is low, and around the cell, they are also love this suffocating, they enjoy this hypoxia environment, they're all becoming like a gang of terrorists. But for example, and we have done it externally, for example, by supplying very single molecule of oxygen, either through the molecular oxygen or through the application of the nanoparticle mediated single oxygen molecule into the site. We suddenly found the terrorist gang is dissipated, and when this cell, which was already lack of oxygen, it dies, then the cells are happy around it. If it doesn't die, then obviously it also revives back. So the oxygen balance, positive oxygen balance, is actually directly linked to the positive energy status of the cell. And the negative oxygen balance is linked to the crude status of the cell. For example, when in a COVID infection patient, for example, your oxygen level 98 on the 6th day suddenly become 92, 93. In most people, if you say, you find that 92 to 95, they can survive themselves by using simple practices or following new individualized protocol. Otherwise, if the panic mode starts, for example, panic, in that panic you find it's not very far from 92 to 88 and from 82 to 86, then 84. And more panic starts, more hospitalization, and more, for example, steroid application, more amount of the antibiotic, unnecessary antibiotic, more amount of other allopathic drugs. The result, there is a completely destruction of symmetry between the positive and negative balance. However, from the 93, 94 level, you practice simple meditation and oxygen injection, for example, through mind into a different part of the cells, and leveling the oxygen through manually. That means by changing the body position or practicing some breathing exercise, you find that in 3 to 4 days, the 94 suddenly attain 96 in 48 hours. And 96 then suddenly slowly recover over 2 weeks. So this oxygen imbalance, for example, pH imbalance, and then wrong administration of the wrong toxic medicines, and plus wrong diet, that can create the scenario for example virus. Otherwise, virus, as I told you, is not here to kill the all population. Virus is actually the negative particle of the microbiome. Its role is to actually enhance the quality of the population. For example, the virus started the life on Earth. Virus sustained the life on Earth. And when time comes, overindulgence and overpopulation and deprivation of the nutritional pattern of the body due to the modern lifestyle and the stress level, the virus reboots in a new format by selecting the selection of species into a more sturdier state than to the weaker state. It's better to kill the patient, kill the individual being weak and non-productive than to actually keep it alive. So this is the role of virus as a cosmic particle, for example. As a cosmic particle, it is actually always the capacity to either create life or destroy life. This is the role of the crude microbiome. However, this part, as it has been mentioned by P.R. Sarkar in the book, is that the crude part, as I mentioned, has to be researched in the laboratory through this classical or available knowledge reductionism theory, plus bringing new intuitional practices. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes. We're falling behind in the schedule.
I'm running out of time, I think.
Yes, and
let me finish in a few minutes. I'll conclude.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay. So now there are a lot of things to be discussed in this angle, creating new hypotheses, new pattern of information, and the important thing actually maybe in future I'll discuss how the natural pattern, polarity, and its propensities are also controlled by microbiome, and how in that stage of situation, if we bring new innovative thinking or intuitional practices, we'll probably create a new theoretical reversible paradox where you try to revert the back. So in conclusion, I'll just mention that living entities, microbiome are living entities, their bodies as subtle as ideas. So one is to harvest this idea, how a living body, such a small particle, far million times smaller than the carbon atom, is actually as subtle as ideas. And we start learning from how these live particles actually sustain in ideas, number one. And what's happening in crude can be controlled by the subtle. And then what seems to be cannot be controlled ought to be controlled by the subtle mind. So that a balance could be reached in the cellular level and the mind level and the psychic level and the local and in the social level and the universal level, which actually brings the next theory, the new humanism. Thank you, Dada. Namaskar. I am done.
Okay, namaskar. Thank you so much. Everyone is really interested in this, and many people would like to have more time. So maybe if your health improves and we have in the future, we can arrange possibly something in our sector you could have just by yourself at some little seminar or something, a talk if you're interested.
Yes, I'll do. My main interest actually is how to bring Microvita into laboratory in the crude form of its research. And obviously at the same time, we practice sadhana and other things. That part is the positive microbiome side. But my interest has been how to understand crude microbiome in laboratory itself. So there are hundreds of millions of questions in mind, but obviously one has to explore based on his own expertise, how they can utilize microbiome from this conceptual point of view.
So also there are some questions in the chat. We don't have time for them now, but if you can stay and you can see the chat, you could type it there to the individual people's questions. Okay. So thank you so much for coming and taking your time late at night, even when your health is still just improving, and sharing with us. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaskar.
Namaskar.